When people ask me what makes this moment special, I always think back to something really simple, something I wrote down when I was just a kid sitting in a classroom in Iowa. I think I was in third grade when someone asked us what our dream was, and I wrote that I wanted to play for Team USA someday. At that age, you Don. T really understand what that dream actually means, you Don? T know about the years of work, the pressure, the injuries, the setbacks, the moments where you wonder if your body is going to cooperate with the goals your mind still believes in. You just write the dream down because it feels exciting and impossible at the same time. So walking into a Team USA gym now, years later, isn't just another practice for me. It's this strange moment where the kid who wrote that dream down suddenly meets the reality of it. But what people didn't TC before this camp started was everything that happened before I walked into that gym. The last season was hard in ways that dawn. T always show up in highlight clips. I only played 13 games for Indiana, 13, and that number sounds simple until you realize how many days there are in a season where Ray's supposed to be competing and instead Ray's sitting on the sideline watching your teammates battle without you. It wasn't T1 big injury that shut everything down either. If it had been something obvious, like a torn ACL or a broken bone, maybe it would have been easier to process. Instead, it was the kind of injuries athletes hate the most, a quad issue that never quite felt right, then a groin problem, then an ankle that kept flaring up right when I thought I was close to coming back. None of those injuries were catastrophic on their own, but together they created this exhausting cycle where every week felt like maybe the week I finally return, and then something else would tighten up or flare up again. Physically that's frustrating, but mentally it's even tougher because Ray always close enough to playing that you convince yourself to push a little harder every time. You wake up thinking today might be the day you feel normal again. You go through treatment, you warm up, you test it, and sometimes it almost works. Then the next day it doesn't. That process repeats over and over until eventually the only smart decision is to step away completely and actually heal. Sitting out like that messes with your head more than people realize. When you re-injured in a big obvious way, you know exactly why Ray not playing, but when as these nagging injuries stacking on top of each other, you keep wondering if you should be able to push through it. Ray still in the building, still watching film, still studying the game, still supporting your teammates, but Ray not competing for someone who has been playing basketball almost every day of her life. That's a strange place to be. There were days where be in the gym thinking about how much work I had put in before the season started, how prepared I felt, how excited I was to see what our team could do, and suddenly I was just watching instead of participating. That part is hard to explain unless you lived it. But what that period also gave me was time to step back and really think about how I wanted to approach my recovery and my game moving forward. Instead of just grinding for the sake of grinding, I started focusing on targeted work, fixing specific things, strengthening areas of my body that needed more support, making sure that when I finally stepped back onto the court again I wouldn't just feel like the version of myself from before the injuries. Do you feel like a better version? That's why walking into the Team USA camp felt different. People might expect that after being out that long be easing your way back in, trying to test your body slowly, maybe looking a little tentative in drills. But the truth is, when I stepped onto that floor, I felt something else entirely. I felt excited, I felt competitive again, and most importantly, I felt like myself. That's the thing about being away from the game for a while. When you finally return, every possession feels important again. Every drill feels meaningful, and being surrounded by players you grew up watching makes that experience even more surreal. I remember watching players like Diana Taurasi, Sue Bird, Maya Moore when I was younger, and thinking about how incredible it would be to share a court with athletes like that someday. Now I am in a gym running drills alongside players who have Olympic gold medals, championship rings, and years of experience at the highest level of the game. That environment pushes you immediately because there's no easing into that level of competition. Everyone is sharp. Everyone understands the game deeply. Every drill has purpose behind it, and that's exactly the kind of environment you need after being away from live competition for months. I'll be honest there's always a little nervousness when you come back after time off. I don't usually get nervous before games, but when you haven't played real basketball in a while there's always that moment where you wonder how quickly everything will come back, the speed of the game, the rhythm, the timing with teammates. But usually that feeling lasts about 30 seconds once the ball is in play. After the first few possessions, your instincts take over again and suddenly Ray just competing. That's exactly what happened during one of the drills at camp when the ball ended up in my hands with the drill basically coming down to one final shot. In those moments Ray not thinking about injuries or time missed or rust, You? Ray, just thinking about the same thing every basketball player thinks in that situation. Get a good look and trust the work you V put in. I took the shot, it went in, and suddenly the gym had that little buzz you only hear when a competitive moment happens unexpectedly during practice. And for me, that moment wasn't about proving anything to anyone else. It was just confirmation that the work I had put in during those months away from games had actually brought me back to where I wanted to be, healthy, confident, and ready to compete again. After that first day in the Team USA gym, I remember thinking about how strange the journey of basketball can be sometimes because one year Ray playing every night, traveling city to city with your team, competing in packed arenas, and the next thing you know Ray sitting on the sideline trying to figure out how to get your body healthy again. The past year taught me a lot about patience, which is funny because patience isn't usually something athletes are good at. Ray used to pushing through things, pushing harder, competing even when Ray tired or sore, but those nagging injuries forced me to slow down and rethink how I approach the game. When Ray dealing with a quad, then a groin issue, then an ankle problem right after that, you realize quickly that simply grinding harder isn't always the solution. Sometimes the smartest thing you can do is step back and rebuild the right way. That's what those months became for me, rebuilding my body, rebuilding my confidence, and honestly rediscovering the joy of playing basketball again without constantly worrying about whether something was going to tighten up or flare up. So when people ask what it felt like stepping back into a Team USA training camp, I tell them it felt like a checkpoint. Not the end of the journey and not even the biggest stage yet, but a moment where I could look at the work I had done and see if it was actually translating, and the environment there makes that evaluation pretty fast because Ray surrounded by players who know exactly how to compete at the highest level. V got veterans like Chelsea Gray, Kelsey Plum, Kalia Copper, players who have been through Olympic runs, championship runs, players who understand every detail of the game. Being around them in a gym is different from watching them on television. You start noticing things that fans probably never see, the way they communicate between drills, the way they move without the ball even when it's just a practice rep, the way they read situations before they even happen. That's the kind of basketball intelligence that only comes from years of playing at the top level, and I found myself watching those details closely because that's how you keep improving. You learn not just from your own reps, but from observing how other great players approach the game. One of the coolest parts of camp for me was realizing that some of the players I grew up watching are now the same people I am sharing the court with in drills. I remember being a kid and watching Olympic teams play, studying the way those players carried themselves and imagining what it would be like to wear that jersey someday. At the time it felt like something so far away that it was almost imaginary. Now I am standing in the same gym preparing for the same path that those players once walked. That perspective keeps you grounded because you understand how rare the opportunity actually is. Not everyone who dreams about playing for Team USA ever gets close to that moment. I remember one of our coaches talking to us years ago during the junior national team programs and explaining that only a small percentage of players who start that journey will ever reach the senior level. Hearing that as a young player makes the moment feel bigger because you realize Ray part of something that thousands of athletes dream about, but only a few actually experience. So when I say I am excited to be here, it's not just excitement about basketball, it's appreciation for the path that got me here and the people who helped along the way, the medical staff that helped me recover, the trainers who spent hours making sure my body was ready again, the coaches who kept believing in me while I was sitting out games. None of that happens alone. Every athlete knows as a whole team of people working behind the scenes to make sure you can step onto the court again, and when you return to competition after months away, you carry that gratitude with you. That's why when people saw that game-winning shot during the drill at camp, they might have thought it was just a fun practice moment, but for me it meant something deeper. It meant I was back in a situation where the game mattered again, where the competitive instincts took over and the work I had put in finally had a chance to show up. Moments like that remind you why you love the sport in the first place. Not for the headlines or the attention, but for the feeling of competing alongside great players in an environment where every possession challenges you to be better. And that's exactly what this camp has been for me so far, a reminder that the game is still the same one I fell in love with when I was a kid, even if the stage around it has grown much bigger. One thing that really stood out to me during the Team USA camp was how quickly the competitive energy comes back once you Ray surrounded by players who think about the game the same way you do. When Ray working out alone in the off-season or going through rehab, you can simulate a lot of things, but as nothing that truly replaces the feeling of being in a gym with elite players pushing the pace and challenging every decision you make. The speed of the game feels different, the spacing feels tighter, and every small mistake gets noticed immediately. That's why these camps are so valuable because they show you exactly where you are as a player in real time. I knew coming into it that I might feel a little rust because I hadn't played a real game environment in a while, and I even mentioned that in the interview. It's natural to feel that little bit of nervous energy when you step back onto the floor after months away from competition. But the funny thing about basketball is that the game has a way of resetting your mind quickly. Once you run a few possessions, once you make a pass, take a shot, and hear the ball bounce across the hardwood again, your instincts start taking over. Suddenly the rust isn't something you thinking about anymore. You just reacting to the flow of the game like you done your entire life. That's exactly what happened during the scrimmages and drills at camp. The first few minutes I could feel myself adjusting to the pace, but after that everything started to feel natural again, and being able to compete alongside players like Paige Bueckers made that experience even more exciting. Paige and I have known each other through basketball circles for years, but playing together at this level brings a different kind of connection. When two guards who see the floor similarly start sharing the court, you can feel the chemistry building even in small moments during practice. We spent time talking about how our games fit together, where each of us likes the ball, how we move when the other one has possession. That kind of communication matters because the better you understand your teammates, the faster your offense starts flowing, and when two playmakers trust each other, it opens up possibilities that defenses struggle to handle. The potential of that partnership is something we're both excited about, but we also understand that chemistry doesn't happen automatically. It takes reps, it takes conversations. It takes paying attention to the little details of how someone moves and reacts in different situations. That, as part of the process rebuilding right now, another thing that made this camp meaningful for me was being able to observe the veterans closely. Players like Chelsea Gray and Kelsey Plum have spent years mastering their roles in high-pressure environments, and when you watch them operate in practice, you realize how many subtle skills go into being great. At this level, it's not always about flashy plays or highlight moments. Sometimes it's about how they control the tempo of a drill, how they communicate defensive adjustments, or how they position themselves in a way that makes the entire team function better. Those details are the kind of things younger players try to absorb because they the pieces that turn talent into long-term success. I always believed that one of the best ways to improve is to stay curious about the game, even when you achieved certain milestones there. Always another layer of understanding to reach. Watching players who have been through Olympic runs and championship seasons helps you see those layers more clearly. You start realizing how much preparation and awareness goes into every possession. That perspective is one of the reasons I love being in this environment so much. It's not just about proving you belong here, it's about learning from the players who have already built incredible careers, and that learning process doesn't stop even when the cameras are on around. A lot of the most valuable conversations happen between drills or after practice when players are just talking about how they see the game. Those moments give you insights that can change the way you approach your own development. For me, this camp has been a reminder of why I fell in love with basketball in the first place. It as the constant challenge to get better, the chance to compete against incredible talent, and the opportunity to grow every time you step onto the floor. Being part of Team USA at this stage of my career feels like the beginning of another journey rather than the destination itself. The World Cup is still ahead, the Olympics are still ahead, and there are many steps along the way before reaching those stages. But every step matters because each one builds the experience and chemistry that eventually shapes those bigger moments. Right now, I'm just enjoying being back in a competitive environment where the focus is purely on basketball again. After the months of injuries and recovery, that feeling alone is something I appreciate more than ever. What made that entire Team USA interview interesting wasn't just the basketball part of it. It was the moment near the end when the conversation shifted towards something everyone in the league has been talking about for months now, the CBA negotiations. Up to that point, the interview had been about injuries, recovery, training camp, the excitement of playing alongside elite players again, and the simple joy of stepping back onto a court after months of uncertainty. But when the question about the negotiations came up, I answered it the same way I try to approach most things in basketball, calmly and directly, because from my perspective the situation really isn't as complicated as people sometimes make it sound. The league is growing, the players want fair compensation for the work they put in, and the owners want a system that keeps the league financially stable. Those goals shouldn't be enemies of each other. So when I said that it would probably help if everyone simply got in the same room, worked through the details, and shook hands on an agreement, that wasn't meant as some grand statement about the business side of the sport. It was just a reflection of how basketball players tend to think when there's a problem on the court. You talk through it, adjust your strategy, and keep playing. The same mindset should apply to the business side of the game, too. The reality is that the WNBA is in a very different place than it was even a few years ago. Attendance is rising, television audiences are stronger, and more people are paying attention to women as basketball than ever before. That growth creates opportunities, but it also requires cooperation from everyone involved to make sure the momentum continues. Fans want to watch great games. Players want to compete and be rewarded for their work. The league wants to expand and build something sustainable for the future. Those goals all point in the same direction if people approach them with the right mindset. For me personally, my focus has always been on the basketball itself. I respect the discussions happening around contracts and league structure, but the reason I am here is to play the game I love. Being part of Team USA, even at this early stage of the journey toward larger tournaments like the World Cup or the Olympics, reminds me why that focus matters. Wearing that jersey represents something bigger than any individual storyline or debate happening around the league. It represents years of history, players who came before us, and young athletes watching right now who dream about being in this position someday. When I think about that responsibility, it brings everything back to the basics. Compete hard, respect the opportunity, and keep working to improve every part of my game. The months I spent recovering from injuries reinforced that perspective more than anything else could have. When you forced to sit out and watch from the sidelines, you realize how much you miss the simple act of competing. You miss the rhythm of the game, the communication with teammates, the challenge of facing great opponents. So stepping back into that environment now feels less like a comeback story and more like a continuation of the journey. I started years ago when I first picked up a basketball. The goal moving forward is simple: stay healthy, keep improving, and help the teams I play for win games. Everything else, the headlines, the debates, the business conversations, will sort themselves out over time. Basketball has always been the center of this story for me, and that Hassan T changed just because the stage has gotten bigger. Right now I am just grateful to be back in a gym full of incredible players, chasing the same dream that started in a third-grade classroom in Iowa, and taking the next step toward representing my country on the biggest stage the sport has to offer.